So thank you, Ruth, for that intro and really grounding us in the events that have transpired in the very recent past, keeping our thoughts and prayers with all of those involved. With that being said, I'd like to introduce Pace, who very kindly joined us today to really discuss supporting our survivors and how we can do that as a community. To give some context on Pace, Pace is the policy and advocacy manager who works to foster a collective movement towards healing and liberation. Pace believes that solidarity is the best medicine, and that we mobilize together. Through mobilizing together, we can dismantle systems of violence and really cultivate a community that celebrates our shared humanity. PACE has worked in multiple capacities within arts, outdoor exploration, and health, human services, and truly believes in the strength of people power, an adventurous spirit, and euphoric for a high voltage rock and roll. Pace hopes to always be a peacemaker, honoring the Latin origin of his name, meaning peace. Pace is a licensed social worker who earned his master's in social work from Boston University and a bachelor's of arts in peace conflict studies from the University of Utah. Just also as another ground housekeeping rule, if folks could ask all of their questions within the chat so we can continue to listen through Pace throughout all the conversations. I thank you all for joining us, and then I'll pass it over to Pace.
Right on. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Ruth, for getting us rolling this morning. I'm really thrilled to have a conversation with you all today, talking about a little bit about the Peace Institute, what we do as an organization, um, what we've been doing this time of year during Awareness Month that many of you may know about, and if not, we'll chat about it, as well as a bunch of our policy priorities and how we can engage together as a community. Um, I have a few slides, so I'm going to share my screen, but I hope that the slides aren't like a separation, a barrier between you and I. I hope that we can engage in the chat and have a conversation and dialogue throughout the day. I just need confirmation from one person at least that you can see slides on your end. Okay, I'm getting a thumbs up. Awesome. So, like mentioned, I work for the Lewis D. Brown Peace Institute as the policy and advocacy manager. For if you are unfamiliar with the Peace Institute, I'm really thrilled to share with you all this really special organization that I've worked with over the last 5 years. The Peace Institute has been around for 30 years, and we often use the phrase transforming pain into purpose. And I feel like the Peace Institute has, the history of the Peace Institute, which we'll chat about, really exemplifies that. And I think that really lends to, Ruth's welcoming today, talking about current events and feeling like there is so much pain. And hopefully today's conversation can provide some insight as to what we can do in moments where we feel hopeless or where hope is dwindling quickly, where there is possibility for peace, and we can transform that pain into purpose. Um, the history of the Peace Institute, I think, really lends to that. The Peace Institute was founded in 1994 after the tragic loss of Lewis Brown, who was a teenager in Dorchester who was killed in a fatal crossfire this time of year, actually. Um, Lewis was involved in his community and, had a vision that peace was possible in his community so long as all of us were engaged in that peacemaking effort. Um, he was also a kid who had a messy room and liked reading books and watching movies and hanging out with friends. Um, I think Lewis's life and Lewis's vision really sparked um, a a sense of possibility for a lot of survivors in the Boston area. Um, when Lewis was killed, his family didn't receive a lot of systematic support. When they left the hospital empty-handed, without resources as what can be done next and where supports can be found. That really sparked the creation of the Peace Institute, creating an environment and a system and policies and practices where survivors are supported in the direct aftermath of the murdered loved one, and then ongoing throughout their healing journey. So I think it's important to start talking about the Peace Institute with the history, understanding it was a moment of tragedy where Lewis's family decided to respond with power and purpose and created now an organization that's been around for 30 years, which is really incredible. Um, the Peace Institute has grown. We have an array of different departments. Many people associate the Peace Institute with our survivor outreach services, which is our those direct services when a family experiences a murdered loved one here in Massachusetts and beyond. They're referred to the Peace Institute within the first 24 to 72 hours, where they are met with crisis stabilization services, support with burying their loved one, and coordinating memorial services, and so on. Um, Even after that crisis stabilization stage kind of surpasses, the Peace Institute is still around for a lifetime of healing support. And that's really where our healing support services come in, with workshops and healing groups and community building opportunities. Um, we also serve families on both sides of the incident um, in our community reentry services, recognizing that cycles of violence impact all of us on both sides. Um, I think the Peace Institute really offers a comprehensive way of responding to um, instances of violence within the Commonwealth, which again, I think speaks to when in a moment of hopelessness, where is the hope and where is the possibility for peace and for healing and restoration? And all of these departments play a different role in providing that possibility. Um, for me, my role within the organization is within our policy and advocacy work. I manage our public policy, our government affairs. But really, the most important piece for me is engaging our survivors in exploring how policy work and advocacy work can be a part of their healing journey. Um, Not something that like you can do if you're interested in it, but really something that all of us can do and probably are doing already. And when we coordinate those efforts, we can make some positive changes in the world around us. Um, One of the ways we do that is every year during an annual awareness month in Massachusetts. If you were not familiar, now you know that Survivors of Homicide Victims Awareness Month is every year in Massachusetts from November 20th through December 20th. This tradition started in the year 2000 when a group of survivors came together and said that there is a disproportionate feeling and impact that comes around the holiday season for survivors of homicide victims. And this time of year is really important time for us to come together as community to engage in peacemaking efforts, build relationships, have conversations, and transform society's response to homicide and perspective on survivors of homicide victims. All of these pictures on this slide are from this year's Survivors of Homicide Victims Awareness Month, which has been really great. Everything from going to the State House and having conversations with legislators to participating in wreath making events and making table runners and sharing crafts, having conversation and visioning with young people around what peace can look like and what service looks like, going bowling. I was really excited to see that last week there was a kickboxing event. I mean, really, the possibilities are endless as far as how survivors within our network come together and envision how we can build community and really foster peace in our communities and beyond. Um, for me, I am a policy nerd. I really love thinking about how our world operates and why it operates that way. But when it comes down to how I engage around public policy at the Peace Institute, I really always want to emphasize that um, how public policy and us as individuals and us collectively are very cyclical and very united. I always like sharing this fact on the left because I'm a Greek American and I feel like most Greeks just take every opportunity possible to share how Greeks did something first. But the idea of democracy was created in the 5th century BC in ancient Greece. This idea that government can represent people and how people can control their government. It was a major shift in idea and shift in power. The word democracy actually means people power in translation. So whenever I'm meeting with survivors talking about, hey, like how can we think about fostering peace on societal level? How can we come together thinking about making changes in the world around us? Public policy is an avenue which we can do that when we engage our government and hold them accountable um, through our collective power and our individual power as well. Um, the Awareness Month, I think, is a really special space because there's a lot of conversations that happen. Survivors come together, share shared experiences, and just have conversations. I like sharing a story about how years ago I was sitting at the Peace Institute during an Awareness Month activity. I think we were creating a craft, and I can't remember exactly what it was. But one survivor shared that they were talking about the experience they had after the loss of their loved one and how it was really challenging for them to return to work. Um, and that sparked the thought of another survivor saying, yeah, actually, it was impossible for me to go to work, back to work too, after, my loved one was killed. Um, and there was others in the room that had a shared experience. Some folks even lost their employment after the loss of their loved one. It was having that conversation and sharing someone's truth that built connection um, around the reality that it's really hard for folks to go back to work after the loss of a loved one. My role is to kind of hear that conversation and go do research. And with that, I found out that in Massachusetts, workers do not have the right to bereavement leave under the law, the right to take time away from work after the loss of a loved one. So what did we do? We filed a bill that is currently pending in the Massachusetts legislature that would legislate the right to bereavement leave for all workers in Massachusetts. Similar to that story around bereavement leave is a bill that we filed this legislative session around unsolved homicides. This is a really important bill to the Peace Institute right now, and the coalition has been huge supporters of this and having conversations around the impact of unsolved homicides. But again, this bill came from a survivor speaking out and saying there is disproportionate grief and pain for having a unsolved homicide case. That those survivors coming together and creating a group called the Unsolved Homicide Ambassadors have created a lot of conversation and space to discuss the impact of unsolved homicides. Really behind their leadership and their organizing, we filed this bill that would address unsolved homicides here in Massachusetts by creating a new office under the Attorney General to observe or to review all unsolved homicide cases here in Massachusetts. I share these bills to tell you all what we're doing as far as policy work at the Peace Institute, but also really to kind of paint the picture of it starts with people having a lived experience, having conversation, seeing how that's a shared experience, understanding where we have gaps within how our society operates, and trying to fill those gaps with public policy. That's kind of the trend that I'm hoping that we can take away from today. Yeah, this is just a little bit more about that unsolved homicides bill. What it would do would create a new office under the Attorney General's office. Any unsolved homicide case that has been unsolved for 3 or more years would have the right to be reviewed. And it creates criteria in how those cases would be reviewed. It would also create an anonymous toll-free tip line for the entire state. Where folks can call in and offer information around unsolved cases. It would also organize a statewide database where all unsolved homicide cases would be organized and coordinated. Currently, right now, it's up to kind of police departments and as to how they do it. So there isn't a unified way across the state of how unsolved homicide cases are reviewed. So this bill would create a statewide standard. I'll just speak on this really quickly. Bills are the idea of a bill, or the idea of a bill becoming a bill and then becoming a law is quite a long process. We don't have to go through all this. I feel like this is a whole workshop in itself. But if you're looking at this kind of roadmap as to where these bills may be right now, that they are around steps 4 and 5. So some of the bills are still within their committees. Other of them have been reported out favorably and are in the Ways and Means Committee, and I'm trying to organize enough support to get them to a floor debate and vote. But that's kind of where they are um, currently. This is, yeah, I guess reiterating the kind of the process as to how this unsolved homicide bill came about and really how that reflects how we do public policy work and grassroots advocacy at the Peace Institute. Again, starting conversations in small rooms, usually around a table with one, two, or less than 10 people having a conversation about an idea and considering what changes and what possibilities there are. Um, bringing those ideas out to community and demonstrating about them, having those conversations with legislators and other civic organizations, doing research about the issue. On the right there, that it says unsolved but not forgotten. That was a report that we did with Northeastern Law School to better understand how unsolved homicide cases are treated in Massachusetts and across the country, and what we can do better here in Massachusetts. And then we filed a bill. But none of that loses sight to the connection around the issue and the reason why that issue is a policy priority for us in the first place. The very real reality that those that are driving this change in this conversation are folks that have experienced the burden of having an unsolved homicide case for years and sometimes decades. Um, Lastly, I just wanted to share this quote about from Audre Lorde that is one of my favorite quotes to share within policy conversations because um, a lot of times, when talking with survivors, there's a feeling expressed that their individual voice is not strong enough or impactful enough to change the world around them. I think our collective voice really um, it feels different when we speak together, but our collective voices are only as strong as the individual voices behind them. Um, and this quote from Audre Lorde that says, "And then our speaking out will permit other women to speak until laws change and lives are saved and the world is altered forever." Um, when I have one-on-ones with survivors and sharing their experiences with me and talking about the challenges that they face within their healing, it truly is, and not even metaphorically, but very literally, like a single voice is a catalyst for change. And a single voice becomes a double voice, which becomes a small group voice, which is a larger group voice. And next thing you know, you have an entire movement behind an idea, um, around a policy change, around a culture change that we're trying to, influence and so on. Yeah. Lastly, I just wanted to share a few ways that folks could get engaged and be involved in public policy work that supports survivors of homicide victims. There are a few bills that we talked about today, real quickly. The bill around unsolved homicides, the bill around bereavement leave. We really could use your support by contacting your state representatives and your state senators to support those bills. If you go to that link, the peaceinstitute.org/take action, there are other policy priorities that the Peace Institute is championing. And the invitation is the same, to reach out to your state legislators to support those bills. We talked a little bit about the Awareness Month here in Massachusetts. The Peace Institute is really thrilled to work with Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and Senator Ed Markey and Senator Liz Warren, who have filed national legislation that would create a national Survivors of Homicide Victims Awareness Month. The space that is so unique to Massachusetts, we hope that space is available to survivors all across the country during the holiday season. So there's an invitation there. If you don't live within Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley's congressional district, we are still looking to get support from other members of the Massachusetts congressional representation who have supported this in the past, but have yet to sign on and support this year. So truly every single email and phone call and letter that goes out to those congressional representatives truly does make a difference. If you go to that link, the /SHVAM, you can learn more about the Awareness Month, and there's even a prompt as to how you can reach out to your congressional representative. Lastly, you can donate to support the Peace Institute's work. Um, I put a special link on here a little bit selfishly. I'm really excited to be running the Boston Marathon in April on behalf of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. So all the money that I'm raising through that marathon efforts goes directly to the Peace Institute to continue to support the organizational growth now 30 years into our work. Um, but as we grow into the new chapter. So you can click on that link, or I can put the links in the chat as well. And that QR code can take you to where you can donate to support me running the marathon, but also more importantly, supporting the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute as an organization. Um, I'm going to pause there, move through that quite quickly, but I wanted to have time to, have a dialogue and answer questions that folks may have. Um, But yeah, so I'll pause there. I'll quit sharing screen and then we can kind of transition into that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pace, for that. Very informative and very, I loved seeing the step-by-step process of the legislative experience in Massachusetts and really spreading that knowledge. So thank you for that. I'll start with our first prepared question. Also, just want to ask people to continue putting questions in the chat as you have them or send them either to myself or Ruth. We will surely get to them. So the first question for you, Pace, is how did you get involved with this work?
Yeah, great question. So I think my involvement in peace work kind of started when I was a very, very little kid. I grew up in a very socially charged and advocacy based home. Um, so you know, having conversations around the challenges that the world faces that prevent peace and how to vision for peace was conversations I started having as a very young kid with my family, which I feel really blessed to have that framework. So if there are any parents on this call, I hope that that's an invitation to have conversations with your kids. They're never too young to talk about the world. They see the world, and they could really use your support in understanding and visioning on how the world could be more peaceful. Um, that kind of transitioned into my studies. I studied peace more as in college. My name means peace in Italian, so I felt like that was somewhat of a divine calling that was bestowed upon me to just like keep doing some type of peace work. um, but more importantly, when I finished graduate school as a social worker, I worked at one of the Boston-based hospitals as the social worker, kind of over community violence and homicide cases for that particular hospital. So when patients would come to the hospital and would pass away within the hospital, I would work with the family while they were at the hospital and help them get connected to community resources um, when they would leave the hospital. And the you know quickly became my one of my favorite organizations to work with was the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. Like as a hospital worker, this was just the most perfect um, you know kind of warm handoff that you could offer a family, having care that's accessible and available in community led by survivors. Um, it made a lot of sense to me, and I was really grateful for that as a hospital-based social worker. Um, After I transitioned out of the hospital as a hospital worker, the Peace Institute had an opening. So I quickly transitioned to be back into community, which I was really grateful to have that transition. Um, and I've been at the Peace Institute now for 5 years, which is really great.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Honestly, hearing that your trajectory of life is really inspiring even. So our second question is really focusing on this. So what does it truly look like to have a survivor-centered response from crisis to long-term healing?
That's a great question. I think one of the kind of the special perspectives that the Peace Institute brings is that it's a survivor generated organization and survivor led and survivor serving. So to have the best perspective, I think, of how to serve survivors is to hear directly from survivors what's helpful. So the services that's been curated at the Peace Institute have been from decades of those conversations of learning from survivors directly as to what's helpful in those moments of grief and loss. Um, and for me, like doing public the policy work, I think, I always really appreciate partners like the coalition because keeping survivors and their experiences and keeping that at the forefront as to why we do the work in the first place really, keeps us centered and grounded in um, how we can move forward in our advocacy work. That we don't lose sight of why we're advocating for issues. Um, that it goes back to the lived experience and the shared experience around those issues. Um, and for me, in our public policy work, like involving and coaching and teaching and training community members to be involved in all stages of policy creation and policy advocacy. Um, I really value the time I get to sit with survivors and um, craft a legislative testimony. How can we take your story and write it out into a script so that you could deliver it at a legislative hearing in support of a bill that's important to you? Um, Having those moments where folks can um, really see their experience and their voice come to life is a really valuable and special space for me. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No, most definitely, yes. Thank you. And then our last prepared question before we branch off into audience questions and continue to have those in the chat or send them to us. What do you want folks to really take away from this lunch and learn in terms of knowledge, in terms of tools? Yeah.
I would say, if there's an issue that's important to you, it's definitely going to be important to somebody else as well. So find those people and try to tackle it together. Um, I think about the work that we do at the Peace Institute. These are, it's folks that have experienced trauma at every intersection and have been disempowered in so many ways. But when we come together collectively, that empowerment's restored. And you have everyday folks taking on really, really big issues and really, really big systems of violence. Um, rather it be, you know, talking about unsolved homicides, you're taking on police departments, you're taking on the district attorney's offices, how our entire government is structured and our courts are structured around solving homicide cases. That's a really big, um, challenge that you're taking on. But to take it on collectively and creatively and innovatively, um, I think creates a lot of possibility. And not losing sight, throughout that process when things get exhausted and you're talking with strategists or lobbyists that are helping you pass bills, those pieces are important. Um, but they never overvalue the shared experience and your experience and your voice. So if you take anything away from this conversation, I hope that you know that your voice is um, a truly, truly a catalyst for change in the world around you. And it is more powerful than you could ever, imagine.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that kind of goes into one of our audience questions from Mark Scott, our board president, of like, are you looking for any bereavement stories or testimonies? So really getting, do you need more voices in this issue?
Hey, we could always use more voices. And Mark, I'll take your support any day of the week. Absolutely. So, if any of the issues that we've talked about today resonate with you and that's a shared experience for you as well, I'd love to connect and we can figure out a way to, have your voice and your story contribute to the stories that have been shared collectively in our survivors network. Um, rather that be writing a writing a letter from your perspective and your story to legislators as to why this bill and why bereavement leave would be important to you, or having that be a part of a letter with other testimonials from survivors. We could definitely use that. Absolutely.
Thank you. And then one more from our advocacy person, Ale. What are some tips you can share for folks who want to get more involved in survivor work and really working with survivors? So really, the advocates and community members that just want to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And Alejandra, great question. Thank you for being here. I truly enjoy working with you on answering questions like this and, how can folks be more involved? Um, the Peace Institute convenes, I feel like one of our roles as an organization, and I think the coalition would probably feel very similar to this as well, is like we are conveners. We are bringing people together to conversation around a table, to envision and to practice together. Um, a few of our spaces are totally open to the public. We have a statewide survivors network, um, where survivors come together monthly. That space is convened by my colleague, McCarley Bursey, who's on this call. I'm really appreciating MC being here. Um, we also have spaces that convene providers and advocates to come together. Those spaces happen throughout the year. Um, coming together and having conversations is how can you be more survivor centered and survivor focused, and wherever you may work. You could work in a hospital like I did. You can work in a community health center. You can work in a youth empowerment space. Um, you can work at a grocery store. You can work literally anywhere. There are ways that you can show up for your neighbors in every single space. And I feel like the Peace Institute is here to convene those types of conversations. Um, some like really tangible ways you can show up for the Peace Institute throughout different times of year. For example, the Awareness Month is a whole month where we engage a lot of folks. We're coming to the end of this year's Awareness Month, but there's always more ways to engage. In April, we do a day of action, a day of civic engagement for Lewis's birthday. That's another time of year where you can engage. In May, we have the Mother's Day Walk for Peace, which Ruth mentioned earlier, which is probably our biggest engagement throughout the entire year. Thousands of people come together and do a big march for peace on Mother's Day. Um, there are these, big moments throughout the year where you can join the Peace Institute, but also every day of the year, there's always a way to engage in the work.
Yeah, thank you. And then I just again want to thank you for your time. Then I'm going to pass it over to Ruth to really take it over on the next part.
Yeah, I would love to take CEO privilege as it may be and ask another question, if that's okay, and kind of bring it full circle. I was reflecting at the beginning of our time together about all of the things that have been happening locally, nationally, internationally these past few days, and how much harm we have seen happen. Um, and I also want to acknowledge that we are really sadly seeing a lot of harm come down from the federal level in terms of dismantling both policies and funding streams that we know keep our communities safe and support folks. And 2025 has been a very, very tough year. And given the focus that you have on healing and justice, and I would also invite MC into the conversation too, with all of the work on peace play, which is a modality I've had the honor of being trained in. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about healing, both in terms of the healing that you do as a part of the Peace Institute, but also healing for folks who are in this work and are holding so much, are holding the needs of survivors, are holding the hard work of policy change, are holding the work of moving mountains to try to make our community safer. So I would love for you to reflect on what that healing looks like for the Institute and for the folks who do this work.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ruth. Um, Before I hand it to MC to talk about kind of peace play and some of our other ways that we, encourage community to care for self and care for each other people, I did want to just share one quick story within our survivors network. Like I mentioned, one of my favorite parts of my work is sitting one-on-one with survivors and hearing what issues are important to them, and trying to figure out ways that we can advocate for change as a pillar of healing, right? And as a pillar of empowerment. Um, um, I think a lot of folks are really daunted by like the state of the world right now and nationally, and that it seems far away and it seems really big. And with that, I really like to emphasize the power of working locally. Rather that local literally meaning your block or your neighborhood or your city, your county, whatever it is, your impact can be truly, truly tremendous in those areas. Um, Back to the story. I was working with one of the survivors within our network, and she was talking about how her block, um, the mail that's always coming to her block is always either tremendously late or it's incorrectly like given to the wrong houses. And that became a really, important issue to her. So we talked about ways that she can engage around that issue with our city council and advocate to, city officials to kind of help inform that. She was able to correct the mail distribution on her street and in her neighborhood. And as small as that may sound, that was such a tremendously important win for her. It was such a great example to her as how her voice, how she has the power to identify issues around her, and she also has the power to inform how that's resolved. Um, and rather be about distribution of mail or something as big as preventing gun violence. Um, like understanding that your voice really does have the power and the weight to have an impact, especially locally, I think is tremendously important as far as longevity, as far as sustainability in this fight, in this work. Um, so I think that, one of the ways for me to like sustain me through challenges and heartache is, celebrating every win, celebrating the small wins. And part of working in coalition and collaboration with other advocates is when you're not seeing any wins, your community can help you see the ways that you're winning and the ways that you're progressing. That's a really valuable part of working in coalition and in partnership. But also caring for self and having the resources or the kind of the tools to care for yourself. And I'll pass it to MC to share a little bit about some of the modalities that we engage in at the Peace Institute and share with community. He can speak to it a lot better than me.
Thanks, Pace. And thank you for the question as well, Ruth. So hello again, everyone. I'm Macaulay, MC for short, Community Outreach Coordinator at the Louis C. Brown Peace Institute. And it was a very beautifully put together question, Ruth. And I think it speaks to the work that a lot of us here are already involved in, and something that our founder and CEO, Clementina, likes to stress. And it's something that is now seared in the front of my mind as one of the facilitators of Peace Play, is that you can't pour from an empty cup, and also understanding that in order to best show up for the communities that we serve, we need to make our self-care and make ourselves a priority as well, and that's not a selfish thing to do. That is being a sustainable community servant. And so we've really taken that and ran with it at the Peace Institute. And so being a center of healing, teaching, and learning, all of those, while these are things that we do externally for our clients and our partners, we also want to turn that internally as well. And so how is healing part of the work of the Peace Institute, and how are we practicing it as staff, and how are we sharing it with others that are also involved in the work? And as Ruth shared, well, speaking of Clementina, she just hopped on. But we've also been very mindful of sharing this healing modality with our partners as well. So some of the folks that we work very closely with have had the opportunity to be trained facilitators on this healing modality. And it's a healing modality that invites people to reflect on what they're experiencing without having to justify themselves to somebody else. And what folks often feel is that and we're not knocking other forms of therapy, although it might be helpful to be able to have somebody to try and talk it out with. If you are experiencing trauma, it might be physically impossible for you to be able to put that into like verbal language. And so we have modified sanctuary word play therapy. I'm not a clinician. I do not have an MSW such as PACE, but we've modified sanctuary word play therapy for it to be more reflective of the communities that we work in. And we've also centered some of our principles of peace that we have that is really central to the work that we're doing at the Peace Institute. And these principles kind of guide us into how we do the work and how we relate to the world around us. And so understanding them as well and making sure that we're really living what we're preaching. I got an opportunity to really wrestle with that yesterday night when we went to St. Susanna's church. And sometimes in this kind of hard work, you also realize that you're not where you necessarily need to be or where you want to be. And it's also giving yourself grace, understanding that we have a variety of different things that if you ask any PI person, they can name it off the top of their heads, like the multi cultural guidelines and the touchstones. And one of them is also acknowledging both and acknowledging that even if it's something that we're struggling with, it is something that we're still continuing to walk forward with. And so, yeah, in terms of making sure that we share this healing modality with our partners, making sure that we're practicing it for ourselves. We want to make sure that this peace play tool that we have found works in our communities is something that is accessible to not only our survivors, but also our staff and our partners to make sure that community has another tool to be able to move towards healing. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much, MC, for bringing Peace Play into the space. And thank you to Pace as well for everything that you shared. I also want to welcome Chaplain Comatina Sherry into the space. And you might be busy, but if you want to say hi, please feel free to do so. And there she is. Did you want to say a quick hello?
No, just thank you for this. This is incredible. Great job. And McConkie, amazing to just listen and bear witness and to see how, again, it doesn't depend on who's leading. We're all leaders in this space. So thanking all of you for just being present and for continuing to have the conversation, especially during these times of sadness and sadness and sadness and sadness. We can't give up. And so we would extend, and I'm sure McConkie must have said it, but we would love to extend an invitation for you guys to do Peace Play sometimes in the spring so that you can center yourself as you continue to be in service.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's a great transition into the final part of our program today. We talked a bit about healing. We talked about getting active in all of these issues. We talked about opportunities to do so, and just something that I wanted to reflect as well. Very, very long time ago, I did some training about self-care for activists. And then I did another training that was about how activism is unto itself a form of self-care. And that as we are seeing so much harm happening in our country, locally, around the world, being able to get active in something is a way that we care for ourselves and not feel paralyzed. And I think that that's so important. And so we always like to end our programs, our lunch and learns, with a call to action. So I would love to bring it back to Pace to help us with some action steps and things that folks can do, including getting involved in Peace Play. So Pace.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Ruth. One invitation that just came to me just in hearing conversation from today is giving yourselves time to reflect on learning and how to implement that into your work and into your life. I feel like in advocacy work, things move so rapidly. It's once you finish a task, there's already 10 things waiting for you. I can't overstate the value it's been for me to just pause and reflect and to learn and let things really sit in. Working at the Peace Institute has taught me about my own grief and how I can manage my grief, both as someone who has it, but also is caring for other people with theirs. Um, I think, like you were saying, Ruth, the work can be healing when there's time to reflect about how what we're learning, what we're teaching can be implemented in our own lives. Um, like MC said, you can't pour out of an empty cup. So having that time to reflect and to build out your own toolkit for yourself, I think is so wildly important. Um, and then other ways to engage, like mentioned earlier, there are a few bills that the Peace Institute's working on where you can reach out to your state representatives and your state senators to support those bills. That's number one. Number two, you can reach out to your congressional representation to support a national Survivors of Homicide Victims Awareness Month. So if are thinking federally, you're thinking nationally, that's a way that we can um, kind of push for valuable legislation on a national level. A piece of legislation that wouldn't change the entire world in which we operate in, but is an important, um, I guess, opportunity for us to really acknowledge the national impact that survivorship has and honor the survivors nationally that do this work. And then third is to support the Peace Institute out of your own pocket. There are ways to donate and support the work that's happening in community and your coalition partners. You can support me as I run the Boston Marathon. And I can share the slides with Alex, so share all those things and those links out to you all. But those are the three kind of advocacy ways to engage. But then lastly, I think just like look out for the person next to you. Um, I have, I was at a demonstration in where I live in Somerville recently, and at the end of the demonstration, there was a lot of energy. There was so many pamphlets that were passed out. There was so many ways that you can donate and to advocate and press for systemic change around you. But then at the very end of the demonstration, the organizers said, ultimately, one of the best things that you can do is look out for your neighbors. You can know their names, you can know who they are, and they can know you, and build a relationship with those that you're in community with. I would emphasize that that goes for your elected officials as well. To know who your elected officials are, but more importantly, that your elected officials know who you are, that you reach out to them and build a relationship with the city councilor so that if you see them in a market basket, they know you and they'll say hello and you'll say hello to them. I think those types of relationships is really when democracy comes to life, when peace becomes more possible, when we build those types of relationships. So those are, I think, just a few final thoughts for me. But I invite you all to continue to be engaged in a beautiful cause. I feel like this coalition is a really important part of the work and my work at the Peace Institute. And I just really value the space whenever I get to be in community with you all to learn from you and to be guided from you in the vision and the hope that you have. And I hope that our team at the Peace Institute can really reciprocate that for you all. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity today.
Speaking of community, just looking ahead to next spring, the coalition is always very active in the Mother's Day Walk for Peace, and we will do so again this coming May. And so for folks who want to come and be a part of our team, you will see many opportunities to get involved and see how this collaboration comes together, which also brings full circle for me as I started telling the story of my presence here at the coalition is because of my initial involvement with the Mother's Day Walk for Peace and finding out through the Peace Institute that the coalition was looking for its first executive director. So I wanted to say that with Clementina here because you're absolutely a part of my history with this coalition as well. And so this is a relationship that means a lot to all of us. And I want to end with gratitude, not just because I am here because of the Peace Institute, but because the Peace Institute keeps on showing up for the coalition as well in so many ways. And so much of who we are today is because of our partnership with you. So we look forward to much more meaningful and forever work together because it is in community that we move the work forward. So thank you to Pace, to MC, to Chaplain Clementina Sherry for joining us, for everyone who spent time today being with us. I know it's a hectic season, but I think it was also really nice for all of us just to be able to take this deep breath together. The news has been so much. And if this gave you an opportunity to just sit and feel a sense of nurturing and healing, then I am glad for that. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to our friends at the Peace Institute. We look forward to seeing you, all of you again very soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.